All right, so hello, Goodman Games fans. This is tonight's episode of the Scrivenery, and my normal co-host Trevor is at GaryCon right now, so he's not going to be joining us. But I've brought in a friend of mine, gaming friend from back in the high school days. Say hi, Aaron.
Hi, Aaron.
Okay, so tonight we're going to be talking about world building. Uh, as a in the realm of game materials publishing, one of the things that somebody might publish is, of course, a campaign setting. Speaking from personal experience, that's something that I've fleshed out myself a fair bit. So we're going to dive into what that looks like if you want to consider publishing a campaign world setting. So, of course, in the background of RPGs, D&D, there were a host of different world settings that were put out by TSR and Wizards of the Coast. They started off with the very first one was Blackmoor. Then, of course, came World of Greyhawk and Forgotten Realms in the early days. And then you had some that were more thematic, like you had Dragonlance, you had Ravenloft, and of course I'm skipping a great many. And one that I came across as we for a few years played the Pathfinder game, which I won't, the game system itself left a lot to be desired, but they had a published game world called Golarion, which was kind of interesting, and it had its highs and lows like any other game world setting, and but it was, well, you take the parts you like and you leave out the parts you don't. So
Very true there.
yeah, exactly. And we definitely did that. They had this one kingdom that was had cyber tech and jazz going on. I was like, well, no, I want a fantasy world setting. Not I don't want Gamma World in my fantasy world.
Yeah. I, I, if I see gunpowder, it's gone.
Yeah, I
That's
agree.
just my own personal thing. Some people like it, and if you like it, good for you.
And
Go with it.
yeah, especially if maybe that's part of you want to specifically have something that's say a pirate setting, a adventure on the high sea setting. You want to have cannons. Hey, knock yourself out. Go for it. It's just a matter of what is the flavor that you want to have. Which then leads me to our first topic that we're really going to dive into. One thing that you want to have some thought to at the onset of this is what is the flavor of this world that you're thinking of, and that flavor is represented by a number of different things. Certainly, one of the things that sets a flavor in a context is if something mirrors or has some similarity to or is modeled on some point of world of Earth history. For example, like I'd mentioned, pirate games, adventures on the high seas, and so forth. Okay, if you're thinking about that, you're thinking, all right, similar to Earth in the 1600s, 1700s, etc. So but there's also some different factors that can describe what's the nature, what sets the flavor of the world. One of those things would be level of magic. Magic
That's a
can
huge one right there.
Right, yeah. Magic can be very rare. Magic can be ubiquitous. Anywhere in between, or it can be, oh, only certain types of people can use magic.
Yeah, you and I, a friend of ours ran a game and no magic in the whole game. And you come in one of my games, there's magic shops. So, like you said, it just depends. Know what your players like. If you're working on some kind of something for publication, like Ed said, you got to make these decisions ahead of time. How do you want your world to look and feel? Do you want it dark like Ravenloft? Do you, you know, there's, you got to come up with all that.
Yeah, and those things, I think it bodes well to have those things presented as part of your product marketing, so people know this is the kind of this is the nature of this world, because people who that way the people who are looking for that kind of a thing or are comfortable with that kind of a thing, they're going to be attracted to that. Another variable in that is something that we already talked about, is level of technology. We tend to think in terms of, if you're paralleling Earth history, we tend to think in terms of, everything from ancient times up until about the Renaissance was all pretty much one big blob that was basically the same. No, there was actually technological innovation that happened throughout that time. What's the tech level you're setting? Or are you, like I said, there was that one game world where they had one kingdom that had
Fiber.
yeah, basically robots and crap. Because, they reasoned it. I was, because a UFO let crash there or something like that. Okay, well, fine, for whatever. If that's what you want to have, fine. Um, but level of technology is a factor, and that includes just things like gunpowder.
Yeah.
And of course, it's reasonable that different kingdoms or different realms might have different levels of technology. Different regions of the world might have different levels of technology.
I mean, you could have one of your sections. The reason this country's the aggressor country is because they have slightly better technology than the neighboring.
Not that that's ever
And
happened in Earth history.
no, not at all.
Right. And then, then there's the general mood. And this is something that I really want to get into a little bit more in detail. We certainly, there are some settings for which that are notorious for their mood. Ravenloft probably is one of the top ones.
Cthulhu.
Yeah, a Call of Cthulhu setting. I feel like, how about, for example, cyberpunk type stuff is a certain
Shadowrun.
right Shadowrun those kinds of things set a certain Shadowrun is kind of it's not quite horror setting, but it's kind of dark and gritty in a certain sense, and so
And futuristic. So
right.
like you said, you gotta. This is the setting I want.
Hmm.
You want it high fantasy, low fantasy, future. You know that kind of stuff.
Yeah, and Lord of the Rings, for example, um, magic is a in well, on the one hand, there is a significant amount of magic, of course, in the setting, but it's magic is not something that's available to your average
Mm-mm.
person. If you read the background books like the Silmarillion, Gandalf is not a human wizard. Gandalf is essentially an angel. And so, when you think in terms of magic items, are extraordinarily rare. Spells are extraordinarily rare, and so it makes magic very very significant and meaningful. If so, the general excuse me, the general mood might be something that comes across very strongly with the nature of your environment. Again, like a Ravenloft, there's no mistaking this is gothic horror. On the other hand, you may simply have something that is something that's analogous to a medieval Europe kind of setting. And in that case, it doesn't really have a mood, but it has a environment that people can probably relate to.
Yeah, and I mean, you depending like those are the environments that I mean, well, in what we play for the most part, that's what people expect. I mean, you expect that, medieval type setting. I'm I don't expect Teletubbies or Muppets. I expect, knights in shining armor and dragons. And if that's not your cup of tea, if you like, cyberpunk, I got my laser rifle, can tap into a computer thing, sure, go with that.
Well, and by that same token, you mentioned kind of facetiously Muppets and so forth. Well, is your setting a serious setting? Because there are some, I've seen some that aren't.
Yeah.
And you take paranoia for example. Paranoia is a
Oh,
future setting, but it's meant to be goofy. It's meant to be a bit silly. And so, there are settings that aren't meant
they're
to be
after
taken
me.
seriously. What's that?
They're after me.
Exactly. And so, it's not to say that you can't have such a thing, but just make it clear that that's what your product is. And so people who are looking for, hey, I think every once in a while we want to have something. Another great example is X crawl. It's not a published world setting in a sense, but it's in the rule book that covers X crawl. It goes into what the world setting is. And for those who aren't familiar with X crawl, the basic premise is it's kind of an alternate reality, present day Earth, but with magic, and kind of like the movie The Running Man. Um, Dungeon
Very much
crawling
the
is a
running man.
live televised blood sport, fight to the death. And so your team of adventurers goes into an artificially created dungeon, and you duke it out with real life monsters, and you're on TV. And so that certainly has a certain mood to it. And there are times where I tell you what, that's exactly what I'm looking for in a game. And it's a little bit over the top. It feels a little bit um I don't know how you describe it. Pro wrestling kind of feel.
Yeah, yeah. I always like trying to do commercial bits when we're playing that. You
Exactly.
know, work the crowd up, so get extra points that way. Even though
Right. So it
you
has a
know,
certain silliness that's built into it, but that's what you understand is part of the setting, and sometimes that's what you're in the mood for.
oh yeah. Like when I go to a convention, I here's some serious games, here's some fun games. You gotta spread it out. I mean, I love D&D and Hackmaster things like that, and the DCC line, all that. And but sometimes you just need something else. I mean, this might just be some one shot fun. We're all Muppets going around killing the Teletubbies. I don't know.
I actually played in
It's
a
some
game where literally we were Muppets, and it was a blast. It was at a convention, fun game.
yeah. I mean, sometimes you gotta get outside of what you know, your box and have a blast.
Yeah, absolutely.
And if that's what you're looking at making, sometimes you don't want to go with the this is what everybody else is doing. You want to, you know, make your world something totally unique, and might flop. You never know. It might be the next big thing because that's what everybody needed in life right then.
Oh yeah, I tell you what, especially we've certainly learned about that in the last couple of years. Sometimes people need something that's a little bit light.
Yeah.
Oh, by the way, looking at if I'm reading this correctly from the chat stream, looks like Reiko subscribed to the channel. So, way to go, Reiko.
Welcome.
So, another thing that sets the flavor of the world is the impact of religions or the lack thereof. Either way. And just like there's high and low magic, there's high and low levels of religion impact. You might have a world in which there's none at all. You might have a world in which there's polytheism to the 100th degree, like in our actual ancient Rome, where they had hundreds of gods. You you, but regardless, have some thought to that. What is the impact? Is it are there different regional beliefs? Are there certain ones that are worldwide, or only in this one city? Whatever. But this is another thing that sets the mood in a certain sense for the world. Um, Another thing that I think is useful in developing the nature of the world is to establish a history. Now, in my campaign book that I've put out, there's a section where I've got a timeline, and I puts forth basically some background of before the what's considered current day in the campaign world, what happened before?
Breaking of the world.
Right. There's no world environment that is just now and there was no before. What happened before? What is the before for all these kingdoms?
Yeah, that's really important because, you know, everything builds on that. I mean, you background is everything. And especially, I mean, because people are going to ask those questions. This ruin's here. Why is it a ruin? You know, what happened?
Hmm.
You know,
Yeah,
but
and that if you figure this stuff, if you have these things fleshed out, then that helps provide consistency for the GM's sake. Now the GM may flesh out whether that's you or someone who's buying your product. They may flesh out and embellish and add all kinds of details of their own, and that's fine. But they want to have something to reference so that they have something to go by, something to build upon. I think a really great example of this, I mentioned before the Silmarillion. For anyone who hasn't read it, it's essentially the prequel to the Lord of the Rings series, and it covers the earlier ages of the world from the point of creation all the way up through the first age, the second age, into the third age in which the Lord of the Rings takes place. And it reads like the Old Testament. I mean, you got to kind of push yourself through that points, but it adds a depth to the Middle Earth world that is incredible. And those kinds of things, I'm not saying you need a separate supplement just for the history of your world, but
if you want to make extra money,
there you go. Certainly, if your book sells well, go ahead and go for that.
expansions are the way to go.
That's right. DLCs. And so, but at the very least, have in your publication, here's the background. Now, that's both how it applies locally, but then also what were the trends, what were the broad sweeps of history that led to this point that shaped these individual, whether they're kingdoms or whatever, or city-states, whatever you've got, that shaped them and made them what they are today, made them why they are. If you've got this kingdom that's here and this city that's here, why are they in those locations? If you think in terms of, you think Venice, for example, which became during the Renaissance a powerful city-state. Venice is a horrible geographic location to put a city. They went there because they were fleeing from other invading kingdoms. I think it was some of the barbarian kingdoms. They set up shop in a swamp, and so that's why it's in that location. That's why there's the canals in Venice, because it's in a wetland. That doesn't. But anyway, all these, everything, why a kingdom is where it is, why it's the size it is, why it's the shape that it is, why cities are here, why cultures are here. All those things have history. They have reason. Come up with those, and it's going to make the world so much more believable. It's going to make it feel real.
But just remember, you don't have to come up with everything.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, that's just too much work for anybody. I mean, you'd spend a life trying to build a world where, I got all this political, geographical, everything, and they just want to get in the dungeon.
Right, right. And certainly
nothing worse than you spend all your time working on all this stuff.
Nobody ever uses it.
Yeah, nobody ever uses it.
Well, yeah, and certainly you
should be there.
Right. You want to leave room, again, in terms of as a publication that some other GM is going to be using. You want to leave them some room for for their own creative license, some room for them to take it and
make
use
it theirs.
Right. Yeah, make it their own. All right. So what you're coming up with this write-up for your campaign world. What are the other things that it ought to have? So personally, because I'm a very visual person, I feel like maps are a really huge deal. They help people to understand and to very readily see what you're talking about, what the descriptions are, what the geographies are, where things are. Helps things come alive. both large scale, like a world map, or hey, I'm covering my campaign will covers this half of a continent or whatever, kind of like Greyhawk did, or much less than a half. But whatever your scope is, overall, and then smaller scale, and then description of the individual regions, whether they're kingdoms, city-states, this principality, this tribe, maybe this area is just a region that's inhabited by barbarians and it's not really an overarching government, but whatever. A description of each one of those, and that's going to come down, and then each one of those is going to have its own local history. What is the background of that land? Its geography, well, they've got these mountains, they've got these rivers, these things are important in that area because of why. What is the
Right.
impact that they've had?
And don't forget, your NPCs need backgrounds too. If you're going to have a named NPC. And pet peeve of mine, I want a picture of that NPC so I can show my players.
Absolutely.
So art can get expensive, very much so,
Yeah.
but it adds a lot.
It really does.
It,
Now, one thing that can mitigate that issue, and I agree, the cost issue, yes, is certainly something you got to keep in mind. It has been a factor in what illustrations I've gone with, and we've covered in past episodes how to deal with some of that. There are sites where you can get some free graphics, you can throw some filters on them or whatever. There's also a great tool by Pro Fantasy called Character Artist, where you can kind of like a paper doll approach create really basic characters that, hey, this is just this is what this NPC looks like. Makes it pretty easy to do stuff like that. But there's means you can. There
hire
are.
Elmore.
What's that?
Hire Elmore.
There you. Oh, sure, no problem. There are. I mean, I've mentioned a couple times. There's a Facebook group called D&D Fantasy Art. You go on there. There's a couple of artists who I've seen advertise individual character portraits for $20. So
Perfect.
yeah, so selectively you can do stuff like that. So let's see. Politics. Give some thought to the politics. Not every system not every land needs to have the same political structure. Some might be a kingdom. Some have an empire with sub kingdoms. Some of them now.
You might have a council instead of a dictator.
Right.
I mean,
in our own world,
a matriarchy instead of the.
Absolutely, or a magocracy.
Yeah.
Ruled by wizards, or in our own world, representative governments have been very rare, but that doesn't mean you can't have it.
Yeah. And you want to. How does each area feel about the other areas?
Mm-hmm.
That's who's allies, who's hates each other. Why do they hate each other? What happened? I mean, these are all good questions to ask. And
so Nuthouse57 put in the chat, there's always some starving artist around like me. So there you go. If you're watching this, patronize Nuthouse57 and commission them to do some art for you. That's how you get that taken care of.
Slap some tasteful art up there, House, so we can see. Make sure it's child appropriate.
That's right. Okay, so I talked about religion before. What are the religions of this particular religion or religions of this particular land? What are the details of it? Or maybe they don't have one. Maybe this land happens to be predominantly they are atheist. But regardless, what have you come up with? What's common? What's uncommon? What is the level of religious tolerance? Maybe there's a state religion. Maybe the state says nobody can have a religion at all. Whatever you want to have, but give some thought to it. Flesh it out.
I kind of like the curveball Dragonlance threw at the beginning,
which was
where all the old gods disappeared, so all the religions that were out right then were all fake, basically.
Mm-hmm.
So you believed in whatever they told you, and old gods came back, and that's what the first Dragonlance book was about.
Okay.
But it was kind of interesting to see, we're we're worshiping the Stay Puft Marshmallow Man because that's what people said what we should do, and you know, oh, but here comes Thor, a real
Hmm.
god, and oh crap,
Right.
now you got burnt marshmallow.
Right. So yes, set up that structure, figure out what it is, how, and also we talked about how kingdoms interact and how kingdoms feel each other. Well, how about how do the religions feel about each other? Maybe they get along fine. Um, maybe there's religious wars. Again, certainly that's been reality in our world quite a bit.
From the dawn of time.
Exactly. Anything that people believe or feel strongly about can be a cause for war. So let's see. And then general life. Like for example, in my book, for each kingdom, I've got a uh, daily life in section, and this touches on on some various things. It talks about what kinds of um, what sort of activities happen in different cities, and also kind of what a sense of what the structure of society is like. Some societies have, in throughout human history, most large societies have some kind of class divisions. Almost all large societies have had some kind of class divisions. There are social structures of different kinds.
The
Uh,
peon doing every day? What's the merchant class doing?
right.
What's your royalty doing?
Yeah, Nut House 57 like says, other religions are always in competition for followers.
Oh,
That's typically the case, yes.
mm-hmm.
Um, Now, mind you, there were certain settings, for example, our own ancient Rome, in a certain measure, if your particular focus was, say, Artemis, and someone else was real big into Mars, that wasn't necessarily a problem because you generally believed in everybody's as well, and it wasn't until monotheism came along that people started having taken issues with that. But um, so yeah, so what are gender roles? That's been a real life part of our world history. Now, uh, in our world, this has been uh, a very lopsided thing. Does it have to be in your world? Not necessarily. Um, what are racial attitudes? And by racial, I mean things like dwarves and elves. If you have, say, an elven kingdom, are dwarves welcome there? If you've
Oh,
got, kingdoms that are predominantly human, how are they about having other races there?
mm, is it a free city? Is it not?
Right, yeah. One thing that I have found really helps to really flesh out, give some feel and some flavor to coming to when you're detailing a society is holidays. Something that I think a lot of times when you're looking
Yeah.
at a game world setting, people don't think about. But it adds so much of a feeling to helping you making you feel like you can relate to being in that culture. Come up with a list of at least two holidays for every
Mm,
culture.
I,
If
I, I'd go with six.
Oh, absolutely, yeah. I'm saying two bare minimum, but
Oh yeah.
uh,
And you usually have like your planning season. You can have a holiday there. Spring,
yeah. And how is it
just
celebrated?
yeah.
And
Now, oh, no, go ahead.
oh, and maybe this one is to commemorate a certain military victory, for example. That's been something that's been very common in human history.
And that would be more localized too. Like you go to a totally different country, they
Hmm.
might not even have that holiday. Uh, July 4th for us Americans. I mean,
Right.
you go to other parts of the world, they'd be like, "What's that? Never heard of it."
Sure.
You
Exactly.
know.
Yeah, and yeah, we see that today there are certain things that, by virtue of our world becoming very global, there are certain holidays that have become pretty widespread. Even in countries where Christianity is really not much a thing, a lot of times they celebrate Christmas nevertheless, just because it's a part of Western culture. On the other hand, there are certainly things that are to something that is unique to that culture. And as you come up with these holidays and when they take place, why are they why is this holiday celebrated? Again, for all these things, just like with history, think about the why. Why is it celebrated and how is it celebrated? Think how much more depth that adds when you're reading through a description of a culture, and then you work one of those into your game event, if or the GM who's buying your product works it into. Yeah, okay, you come into this town and you see that in the middle of the city there's this pool full of purple liquid and everybody's dancing around it. You know, these things are great great adventure fodder for the GM.
Oh yeah. Um, Another thing we haven't touched on, economics.
Mm-hmm.
Like what what kind of coins are being used?
Mm-hmm.
What's valuable? What's not? I mean,
Yeah, we have certain assumptions about that, but even in our own world that is varied. I mean, there was a time in Roman history where some of the legions stationed abroad were paid in salt because salt was incredibly valuable.
rum.
Exactly. We think in terms of gold and silver, but uh, what is valuable and why? And if you want to be kind of standard, fine, be standard. On the other hand, if you want to have some areas that are different, and of course make what's valuable vary from region to region, then just feel free to spin that off, and it adds flavor. But just have some thought to why is this valuable here? Why is this not valuable here?
Yeah. I mean, you could you might have a water area, pearls and all that kind of stuff. This is like what their currency's based on. And you get more inland or something. Oh, well, gold's what's important here.
Hmm.
And then do you have, if I got all pearls, can I trade that for gold? I mean, you got to have things like that. It can really add some flavor to things, and it's also a great way to screw with your PC sometimes when, you know, hey, I think I'm the richest guy in the world, but now we're going over here and I find out everything that I had that I thought valuable is absolutely garbage here.
Exactly.
Yeah. And sometimes that can be so fun. And
Which does bring up a side point that you want to make your product attractive to GMs to buy. Again, if we're talking about a campaign world setting, to a certain extent, your market is game masters. Having mechanisms built in by which they can, by surprise, screw over their party or add a twist that puts their party in a bind, GMs love that.
love it.
So, so things that, yeah, economic things certainly are a big factor in that. Oh, that reminds me of something along that lines. Laws. And
Very important.
yeah, you don't necessarily have to flesh out a legal code for every area, but um, give some thought to at least certain things that here are laws that are maybe particularly focused on things that
Standard.
might, yeah, stuff that's unusual. Okay, murder is going to be pretty much illegal everywhere, unless you have a place where it's not, in which case mention that.
Or murder's illegal unless it's a duel, because that's okay.
Exactly. Work these in because, again, these are things that GMs can use to keep their players on their toes, and that's GM's going to find that very powerful. I had one in a game setting I ran years ago where if I'm sure we've all had a moment in life where someone has inconvenienced you to the point where you're just like, how could this person be so stupid? I decided I made that a crime in one of my areas. That if you did something that was so stupid that it ruined someone's day, that was a criminal offense. And boy, I tell you, did that put the party on their toes because they had a history. So,
One of the coolest, lol twisty thing, like you said, Star Trek Generation. One of the episodes, Wesley Crusher's playing ball, and he stumbles into this,
the garden.
little fenced off garden.
Hmm.
And next thing you know, here comes the law, and they're gonna kill him for it.
Right.
And they're like, "Whoa, wait a minute!" You know, you have really crazy laws like that the PCs aren't aware of. You can have some fun.
Hmm.
How are they going to get out of this situation?
It's especially a really good test for your lawful characters. How will they handle that?
Mm-hmm.
Will they if it's a law that
Sorry,
is
Bob, you stepped in the garden. You're done.
right. If it's a law that is justifiable as legitimate in the sense that, look, this is the law of the land, and this is a government that they recognize as a legitimate government. How are they gonna? How is your lawful character going to handle when they run afoul of this law? You know, they have to come up with a creative way to address it as opposed to just bashing heads. And so things like this add
they
wrinkles.
they should come up with a creative way instead of bashing
Better way to
heads.
put it, right? But things like this add creative wrinkles that GMs, I myself as a GM, love to find in materials because that adds so much fodder for adventures.
Mm-hmm.
Um, we talked about economies. What about trade networks? Well, you've got this land that is really good at making manufactured things, but they don't have a lot of natural resources, so they have to import iron from this other place. Um, Versus this place has pine forests out the wazoo, so they can make timbers for ships, but they don't have whatever. Again, not only will this determine what's valuable and what's not, but then it also will set up what are the trade networks like.
And
These
then,
things can be useful for adventure hooks.
and once you decide what's valuable, who's stealing it? What
Excellent
what
point.
kind of thieves guild or just
Hmm.
general bandits? And then those are always great plot hooks.
Hmm.
And but it's always good to know what's valuable, why are people taking it, and who are they selling it to.
Right.
Mm.
Which raises another side point, since you mentioned thieves guilds. What kind of organizations are there? Maybe some of them are local. Maybe some of them are maybe you do have a guild of some kind that is throughout an entire empire, or maybe even worldwide. What are they? How do they function? Um, Things
Like you're
like
playing
this,
something nowadays, you got the mob kind of thing.
right? Things can add a lot of, again, a lot of things that GMs can use to hook into, or that players can use to, oh, my character's a part of such and such.
Yeah, I'm working on a campaign right now where the whole thing is Thieves Guild. Literally, the players are all going
Hmm.
to be part of the Thieves Guild. And I'll tell you what, coming up with wow, it gets crazy because you're like, you literally gotta, you know, they're going to go into this house. I better know what everything of value is in that house because I know they're going to ask me. What can I steal? And you, you just got to think when you're world building, you don't got to get that specific, but you want the broad strokes.
Hmm.
You know, there's gold's valuable. Maybe it's a society where they only value art. If it doesn't have any artistic anything to it, it's crap to them.
Right.
Yeah. Oh yeah, nice coin. Who cares? It's gold. But this statue that this guy crafted, oh, that's worth thousands.
Exactly.
That can get really interesting if you have a screwed up economy like that. When your PCs are like, yeah, I can't carry a 5,000 pound statue because that's worth millions of dollars. Uh,
I've got these platinum pieces, but it does me no good right now.
Right.
Yeah.
I mean, y-
Well, and in a broad world building sense, you're not going to necessarily get into nitty gritty of
nah.
but suppose that part of your world building is you're maybe fleshing out a certain city to a great deal of detail, or
Hmm.
maybe your world building setting is
A city.
right. Only food, Nuthouse 57. Only food is valuable in a barren land. Absolutely, yeah.
Oh yeah.
Or in any kind of
Water.
post-apocalyptic kind of feel, you know, uh,
What do
quote
you got for
precious metals are
trade?
quote precious metals are useless compared to food, or like he said, water. If you're in if you're in a desert climb, fresh water, yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Which there's another good point. Weather. When you're
Weather,
looking at your, where's the deserts? Where's the snowbound Arctic?
hmm
Where's the water? You gotta. And I always tried to go off of Earth, you know, geography to figure out, okay, I got mountains here. What's on this side of the mountains? What's on that side of the mountains? You
exactly.
know, and sometimes, yeah, that's a little too deep. It just depends on, what kind of product you're trying to put out, or if you're making it for yourself, who are you trying to cater to? Are you making it for yourself so you feel happy and this is what you enjoy? Awesome. Am I trying to make my murder hobos that don't give a rat's butt about what the weather, you know, you got to figure it out.
Sure, but yeah, I think that that kind of thing, have some common sense to, don't put a Sahara desert right next to a frozen
The
tundra,
ocean,
unless um,
magic's
there's something,
involved.
yeah, unless there's something unnatural going on, and you intend it to be unnatural. Other than that, have your weather patterns and your climate patterns make sense. Yeah,
Hmm.
moisture moves off of oceans and hits a mountain, and so on the other side of the mountain, you often have a desert. That is common throughout in our own world. So yeah, weather patterns, this kind of thing, hot, dry, hot and cold, wet and dry, the seasons.
Season, calendar,
Right, a
there's
calendar, yes.
always,
What's your year like? How many moons does your world have? What are the
yeah.
roles of those things?
Now, like real world months drive me insane. I want
Hmm.
my world is 4 weeks, 28 days, 12 months. 3 months is a season. You got four seasons,
Right, right,
cut and dry, easy,
absolutely.
you know. And I
Yeah,
mean, if you like a more complex thing, have at it,
right.
That might be what makes your product, like Corinne had what, 3 moons? And that could screw with the magic of that world. That was one of their unique things.
Okay.
And, you know, different settings. I mean, if you're producing something, what, like you said, what makes your setting unique? What's going to make it to me as a customer? What is your set? What is going to stand out about your setting to make me want to buy it?
Right. Why am I going to buy that as opposed to I'm playing generic setting now, or I'm playing this other setting now? Why do I want to buy your setting when I've got this other stuff? Very good
Right.
point.
Or, when I got all this stuff back here,
Hmm.
why do I want to add your product to it?
Right.
What is going to grab me to go, oh, yeah, that's worth my $40 or whatever,
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah. It
that,
gives them thought to something that sets your world apart.
yeah. And a good cover, a very good cover.
Yeah.
That can sell books, just the cover.
Yeah. At the very least, it gets you foot traffic, so to speak. It gets people
Right.
picking it up and looking through it.
And that's one of the most important things because then if you get them that far, they're way closer to shelling out money to buy your product and,
Right.
you know, keep you in food because, we like food, we've already decided.
Right. So, how much information will your guide have? Now, for example, um, the campaign world that was out for that Pathfinder put out called Golarion. There were two different books. One that was meant for game masters and one that was meant for players. The game master one went into more detail of depth, including things that happen behind the scenes politically and stuff like that that players won't know about. How much information do you want yours to have? So give some thought to that. Do you want your book to be intended for game masters only? Do you want it to have stuff that's common knowledge that everyone would know? Or do you want to have different sections? So here's a GM section, here's a player section. But give some thought to that, because so that as someone's buying it, they know, and maybe I would designate this too in your introduction to your book, so that the person who's getting this book knows, hey, if I'm the GM, there's stuff in here that I probably want to keep GM eyes only. Okay, so I know that I'm going to want to just have this and not my players. On the other hand, if you want to make it more common knowledge, just have that approach, keep it consistent throughout the book, and let the buyer know that.
Yeah.
And
one thing I've never seen yet, and I kind of would like to see it, is kind of like you talked with that Galarian thing, is, here's the big DM's guide book, and it's shrink wrapped because with it's coming this little, smaller book, and this is, like you said, this is what the PCs know. Here's the most common history. Here's the most, the most common races, the most common everything. So they have an idea what they're going into or whatnot. And I think that'd be really cool, because I've had other books where, the beginning of the book's the player section, and the back of the book's the DM section. And you know how many players are reading that DM section because they got it in their hands, even though you put warning, oh no, if you're not the DM, don't go past this point. Yeah, they're reading it. Don't let them lie to you.
Sure.
Curiosity killed the cat.
Right.
So, and then sometimes as a DM, if you have that kind of book, you can always screw with your players that way. They think, oh, this is how this is going to react. Like, my players, I noticed after playing D&D for so long, they knew their first level characters knew what every monster was immune to, or this or that. So I just started changing it. It threw them for a loop.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, you hit this monster with this thing, it'll kill it. Oh no, well now that healed it. So thank you for playing, and thank you for using your metagame knowledge, and
Right.
we took care of that.
Right.
But keep it consistent. Keep it fair, keep it balanced. Just because I change one, if I change its vulnerability, I'll give it a different vulnerability. One you don't know. You'll have to figure it out to make the game fun again. Not being able to. That's. You can never go back to your first days of gaming.
Mm-hmm.
And that's where it was the most fun, because you were learning, that skeleton, until I figured out that blunt objects did more than,
Mm-hmm.
That's where it was fun, and
Which I will say is one of the things about DCC that has been really fun for me is there's no standard magic items. There are not a lot of standard monsters. And so, it gives you kind of that feeling of mystery back again. So, one thing, and this I think will maybe our last topic here. What is going to make your world attractive to other gamers? And we talked about this to a certain extent already, but the angle that I want to put on it, the spin I want to put on it this time, is understanding that what is attractive is going to vary radically, or could vary radically, from one game group to another. You have certainly a game group, and this is probably a bit more common with perhaps the OSR crowd, who really want to go bash in a door, kill some monsters, and take some treasure. Although even that, you can still have some thought and some flavor to the module, to the adventure setting, so that not every door is the same, not every monster is the same. It still makes, but anyway, Different different people are going to have different appeals. Not everybody likes to play Ravenloft. Not everybody likes to play Cyberpunk, whatever. Have in mind targeting a certain type. Well, or rather, on the one hand, you can try to target a broad base of gamers and make your world kind of have a flavor that's very adaptable. Or you can have a mood to your setting that is very different, and understand that that's going to target a certain type of gamer. And how do you go about getting it across to the potential buyer that this is something that is a XYZ kind of game, and so the people who are looking for XYZ kind of game will be attracted to your material.
Another good point is this going to be a generic setting to where, pretty much if you're playing D&D, DCC, different type, that are similar,
Mm-hmm.
they can pick up this product and, with minor easy conversions, they can run it.
Good point.
Or is this something, or it's 5e, I want to jump on the big bandwagon and I want to try for that big Matt Mercer money, and, what are you shooting for? If are you going for Call of Cthulhu? What specific genre or company are you trying to make your product for? That's always a great thought. And or are you going to try like here's an across the board as much as I can, get the most people interested in it? Those are the things you got to decide.
Absolutely, yeah. Your game world setting could be mechanics agnostic, to where you could snap it onto pretty much any rule system. It could be something, for example, in my books, it's specifically tailored around DCC rules. Could you take it and adapt it to other game systems? Yeah, without too much trouble. Particularly for the sense of the flavor of the campaign and the setting and the descriptions and so forth and stuff like that. But yeah, so understand where you're shooting. And even within, say, for example, DCC, of course, there are different subsystems. You've got Langmar stuff, you've got All America, and you've got these different types of environments. But have a sense. For example, again, if you want to have something that, there's some types of groups that love mystery and puzzle solving and stuff like that. Well, then have areas of your world that are specifically going to lend themselves to that kind of thing. If you have people who say there's no such thing as a good game environment that does not have dragons, well then, if you want to have a mind towards that, then specifically touch on areas where here's this dragon that's in this place and stuff like that. These are details that you can put into your environment that are going to help you go towards a particular type of GM or player who's going to be who's hopefully going to be attracted to your product. And then finally, promoting. This is a little bit of a broader topic, and I know we've talked about this in previous episodes, but
Kickstarter, Facebook.
Sure. In this episode we're talking specifically about world building. I as a GM like to pretty almost exclusively write all my own adventures, but some GMs, they want to have adventure modules. If you've got a world setting, write some modules to go with it.
Remember that expansion thing we were talking about?
Right, exactly. Yeah. And maybe consider publishing these at about the same time, so that somebody says, oh, if I buy this world setting, there's already this adventure module to go with it. Or maybe it's even
from level 1 to X.
Right. Or maybe it's even the last 10 pages of my campaign book is an adventure or something like that.
Always good to put a starter something in there.
Right. Yeah, so publishing modules is a great way to help promote your product because then it gives people a reason to engage in that game environment. One other
Yeah,
thing,
and
go ahead.
you got a lot of people out there that just don't have the time
Hmm. Hmm.
to write their own thing. So it's easier for them to go, "Oh, you already wrote one, boom. I'm just gonna This is what I'm gonna run." Well, you just made more money because,
Right.
you put the time into it. They don't have the time. You're making money.
And one thing that has been very successful for me is run events, run adventures that are set in your campaign world at conventions. Um, Both physical conventions and online conventions. I had at one of the, I don't remember if it was one of the Cyclops cons. I think it was one of the Cyclops cons. So an online convention, and I had someone who signed up for my session specifically because it was called For the Glory of Rome, and this particular gamer happened to be a classics major in college, had never played DCC before, but saw the name of my game and was like, "Oh, this sounds cool." They bought a copy of the campaign world. Um, I have sold numerous copies. You take physical copies of your campaign world to the con with you, run the event, and then say, by the way, if anyone had a great time, I've got a couple copies you can buy right now, PayPal, Venmo, whatever, and that really can help
Food,
get right.
because food's valuable at cons.
That's right. All right, and with all that being said, we're going to have to go and make way for the 9 o'clock show that's coming up. So, thanks for joining me for this session, Aaron.
Oh, glad to be here.
And thanks for joining us, Goodman Games viewers. And catch us next time for the next episode of the Scrivenery. Good night.